Autistics in Libraries and Their Allies. I would love to see it as active as a library listserv. You know, librarians love email listservs. There's also this ALA Library Think Tank group on Facebook, which has just so much activity on it, and I would just love to see that, see this group have that amount of activity. It's hard because I feel like I mean, it's got about 120 people on it, and I feel like I try to post stuff and I'll get some positive comments, but the conversation doesn't continue. And I feel like I'm the only one, you know, posting things. And there have been a few people who have posted stuff, and it's good, whether it's sharing their own experience, asking questions for resources, referrals, or sharing articles. But I would just love to see this group take off and kind of be active on its own without relying on me to post so much. And so, yeah, again, Autistics in Libraries and Their Allies. I want to continue to work with the Mosaic program at UTC, University of Tennessee at Chattanooga. That's a program that supports students on the spectrum. They're phenomenal, and they just keep getting better and better all the time. And it's just such I feel so proud to be associated with a university that offers this level of programming, and it's so empowering to see these students who need just a little bit more assistance, but then they do these, you know, they're all over. Some are English majors, some are engineering, anthropology, communications. I mean, every major has, you know, representation. I'd also like to work with colleagues in my library to hopefully offer some type of employment or internship opportunities for interested students on the spectrum who might be considering librarianship as a career. We know that getting pre-professional experience, as someone else mentioned, is essential for being able to get jobs in the future. But I can only advocate for this, but I can't do it on my own. You know, I need to have buy-in from colleagues and monetary resources to make it happen. And so it requires a team effort. And so I'm hoping that something, that we can offer something. I don't know what it would be, I don't know the depth of it, the length of it, who would be involved, but it's something that I have mentioned several times, and you know, we'll see where it goes. But I guess that's kind of a metaphor of a lot of this for me, is that I can't do this all alone. And it has to be a group of people, whether they're on the spectrum or neurotypical allies who really get it. And you know, I can advocate, but I have to get buy-in from other people. So, thanks.
I just joined your Facebook group right now.
Oh, great! Thank you so much.
Okay.
Sure.
Oh, sure. Yeah. Or comments.
Erin.
Mistress with the microphone. So the panel is willing to take some questions from the audience. We probably have about 20 minutes or so for questions.
I'll start. I'm curious about, from those of you that were diagnosed on the spectrum more as adults than as children, what caused you to go and get tested? What made you think, did you think there's something wrong with me? And was it a relief to find out that there's a name for the way you were feeling? So I'm just curious about those of you as adults who looked.
I had a mental breakdown. I was 20, and I turned 20. I was a sophomore in college. I was away, 4 hours away from home, and due to bizarre set of circumstances involving a roommate who got way too close to me, OCD happened to take over, and I had a full-on mental breakdown. And while I was getting the OCD treatment, my mom, who is here today, hi Mom, she told me while I was working my way through that, she's like, you know, I've suspected for years that you're autistic. You might as well get the diagnosis because I think it would help you. And she was right, because she's my mom. And getting that diagnosis was kind of an earth-shattering moment for me, because suddenly everything that had ever happened to me suddenly made sense. Like, oh, this is why nobody likes me in middle school. This is why I don't really wear things that are tight-fitting. This is why I hate being touched by people, even if I know them really well. This is why I have the closest emotional connection in my life is with my cat. I get it. Like it was a very mind-opening moment, and it just explained everything. And so then I was basically back at square one, and I was like, okay, so now I know why I am the way I am, but right now, based on this was way back in 2009, and basically everything was like, oh, you're an awful disease and you need to be eradicated. And I'm like, no, I don't. It took a lot of unlearning then I had to unlearn the whole thing of society thinks you are bad. And now that we're starting this, we're really, because of a lot of advocates who are awesome and who I'm trying to keep up with, we're starting to see that shift towards autism is a thing that is okay. And it's just another way of existing as a human. And it's a really refreshing shift from where I was 9 years ago when I was diagnosed, and there was not much. And most of what was there was pretty negative and calling me an epidemic when I was like, I'm not, I'm a person. So it was just a really nice shift. It's been really nice to see that shift from when I was diagnosed to now. It's really been, I mean, it's a lot of work still to go, but it's been a huge difference. So yeah, TLDR, I had a mental breakdown and my mom was like, you're autistic, go get the diagnosis. So I did.
Thank you.
I was 23 in graduate school, and it was a confirmation of what I had already figured out about 3 years earlier. My parents, avid public library users, found a memoir by Stephen Shore, Along the Wall, something on the wall, and was the title. And his story, my parents were like, you know, Charlie, you should really read this. We think you might have Asperger's. And so I read it, and yeah, I mean, I found the confirmation. I found so many similarities. And again, like you said, it connected the dots. Like my obsessive personality, rigidity, clumsiness, poor fine motor, poor gross motor skills, real struggles with math, social, I really, in K to 12, never identify with my peers. It was always adults, obsessive special interests, you know. So it was, the diagnosis was at that point something just confirming that I already knew, and I just wanted to get it, so I had the paperwork, just you never know. But, you know, since then, the DSM-5 has come out, and I haven't studied that much, but I don't know how the classification works now. I don't know if some people who would have been previously diagnosed would still fall under ASD. I don't know, you know. But again, I want to just emphasize the challenges with the whole, like I said earlier, the whole passing as neurotypical. And I feel like I'm trying to navigate both worlds. And I feel like a lot of, when I participated in autism conferences for adults and that type of thing, and they are fortunately starting to offer more and more, I find often, and this is completely a neutral statement, this is not a judgment. I find that a lot of the challenges that they are dealing with in their lives, other adults on the spectrum, are not challenges for me. I don't have challenges grooming. I don't have, I'm financially, economically independent, and I'm not dismissing that. It's just different. It's different challenges for me. And, but then you throw me into a purely neurotypical world, and it can be very challenging for me to navigate on a number of levels, although it doesn't seem like it on the surface. So it's really, it is what it is, it's got its, I feel really fortunate, and I'm not trying to complain, don't want people to feel sorry for me, but it's mixed, and I think that there's a lot more focus on adults now, and I love that. Because again, and the other thing that I wanted to say, I just remembered, is that I cannot go back to the 90s and be really resentful that I wasn't diagnosed. That when I was diagnosed by my psychiatrist at, 12 years old with OCD, why didn't he figure out the autism, the Asperger's? I can't waste time kind of being frustrated over, that, because it's out of my control. I can't help when I grew up, the context of what was available, the knowledge, the awareness, even among the professionals, it just wasn't there. And so that's just how it was.
Well, I technically was still a child when I was diagnosed, but I was right before my 18th birthday, which is significant because that meant that it was considered developmental disability and I was eligible for state services. Now, at the time, like I said, it was sort of a long process that really intensified when what they call at the time an exaggerated adolescence. I like to call it my terrible teens. But basically, that sort of I was hospitalized a couple of times for what you might sort of call a nervous breakdown. But basically, all my life, I sort of had problems. I mean, I was diagnosed mentally retarded when I was 3. I was in special ed. I was considered learning disabled. I had problems in school. There were things I was good at, things I was bad at. I was teased a lot. I got into a lot of fights. So having the label of autism was actually a good thing, at least at first, because it actually explained a lot of things. And even the things that I did object to, that I found personally offensive, like being a literal thinker, over the years I've come to see how that can be true in certain ways, and as I've gotten older, I've learned more. Now, interesting, around the time I was diagnosed, my psychiatrist at the time said I was lucky to not have been diagnosed earlier, that I grew up without a label. I mean, this relates to something that Susan Sander was saying earlier today when she talked about less structure, more freedom. In essence, when I was growing up, there was no For Autism series for me, or my mom. Basically, you just had to deal with me as you found me. And and in many ways, that was actually, that was a positive thing. I mean, when my psychiatrist first said it, I was still somewhat traumatized. I couldn't have disagreed with him more, but over the years, I've come to think he's right. That in essence, that not having that label was a benefit, but having the label also is a benefit too. So it's like there has to be a kind of balance where, you use the label. Well, I mean, I guess label has to be a tool that's not weaponized. It has to be something that we can have it work for us and not against us. So I guess there has to be a balance between understanding what's happening here so you don't just say you're a bad person, but also not limiting yourself based on this label. Like I look at things that are autismified for kids nowadays. Things that I was involved with as a kid, which of course were not autismified. Like for instance, yoga or karate or tennis. It's like I did some of these things as a kid, but I just did them because they had to be done. It wasn't because, it's for autistics. It's just interesting. It's just, well, to achieve a balance between when the label's conductive and when the label's constrictive.
Sorry.
Other questions from the audience?
Okay, first of all, thank you for being here. This is my first attendance here at this, and we have quite a large autistic community that visits our library. We are in Braidwood, Illinois, and one young man, he's 17, Anthony, visits our library every single solitary day. I'm not kidding. He gets off school and straight to the library. Saturday, he's at the library from open till close. So I encounter Anthony every single solitary day. Now, the difference between him and you guys as I'm listening and trying to learn is you talk about needing quiet, have a hard time with touch, and developing connections, okay? Where Anthony is the opposite, okay? Anthony thrives on communication and wanting to be involved in everything. So I'm also the homeschool librarian at my library, so I do a lot of teaching. So what I do is the things that I do with my 3rd through 6th graders, I will do with Anthony. So I'll say, come on Anthony, let's go and learn how to do string games, or let's go learn how to weave, and he's all excited. So one of the things that I noticed that you mentioned when I wrote this down is where you said, listen to the autistic people when they talk and don't talk over them. People always think that they don't know what they are talking about, okay? Now, with Anthony, Anthony would totally dominate my entire workday, if he could. So what I'm looking from you is to know this, if since you guys are on the autistic spectrum. Now we have one, Charlie. Charlie won't look you in the eye, he doesn't want to be touched, and he comes in all the time. So he kind of reminds me of what you guys deal with. And then Anthony's way on the other end. So, we love Anthony to death. We allow him to do little jobs around the library. We bought him a Fossil Ridge library shirt, all kinds of stuff. But what he will do is he will go from employee to employee to employee, wanting that interaction the whole time he is there. So what is appropriate and inappropriate on how to handle Anthony so he knows we love you, but we have work to do too.
I think you brought up a really good point. So you demonstrated by your example that you need to deal with autistic people on a case-by-case basis. There is not a prototype. There is not a set of defined characteristics that apply to everybody. Some of us might be really quiet and really solitary and not want social interaction, and some might not know when to shut up. And I'm on the latter. I have realized that I would hate to have to take a class with someone like myself, because I was always up in the front, and it was like a dialogue between me and the professor. And the poor students that were, had that class derailed because of my own little pet peeves. And so I think that what it boils down to in this case is perspective taking. He is not understanding others' needs and others' perspectives, and it's called theory of mind. And it's not a malicious, I'm sure it's not a malicious thing, it's that he just is not, he is so focused on his needs and his obsessions and what he wants to get done, his agenda, that he's not sitting back and observing and seeing how that impacts other people. And so I think, as I said earlier, you can strike a real balance between supporting him, loving him, being there for him, but also challenging him so that he can grow. And this is I think a life skill that he's going to have to develop. I mean, it's going to serve him in school, college, relationships with other people, work environment. It's called reciprocity. And that's clearly something that he needs to work on and be pushed on. How to do it, I don't know. I'm not an educator, but I'm sure there are books about it. But that really good question.
Okay, and Erin.
That is true. Relationships are an interaction. At the same time, I think that professionals and parents should also know that if you flipped it up, the prevalence numbers upside down, 1 in 65, 1 in 65 people are autistic. That also translates to 1%. You could also flip that up to say 99 out of 100 people are neurotypical. So, just for an instance, in some conversations I call myself autistic. Part of the reasons why I've come to use the phrase on the spectrum is because when parents and professionals talk to me, they correct me on what to call myself. And I lose my train of thought to access for that. So there is an interaction piece there, but I also think you should understand that there is a large disparity between people with disabilities and neurotypical professionals. Let's go a little further. I'm 32 years old, was born in 1985. That was when people started counting numbers of autism. And so in other words, I'm an adult. I'm one of those people you're talking about when you're talking about an epidemic. But if I said that to you as a parent, that might immediately put me back into the services category. I wish I could have both strengths and weaknesses when I talk to you. I wish that I could flap my hands and not be afraid to be put in a special place and be a special employee. And I also wish that I didn't have to spin plays in order to survive. It makes me very ambivalent. There is some element of interaction, but by far, you've written everything. Neurotypicals have had the floor for thousands and thousands of years. I'm getting a little bit overly passionate, so I wanted to take a minute to calm down just a little bit. But parents, I mean this in the nicest way possible. You're in my way. I'm a young adult, I'm a professional, I want to move up in the world, but I'm encountering all of your attitudes about disability. I want to compromise and I want to fulfill my responsibilities, but I also have to, the things I'm allowed to say, the things I'm able to say, is very dependent on weighing the costs and benefits of what might set you off. So there are theory of other minds as well as theory of your mind. Whose mind is it?
Yes.
Thank you.
If I could just jump in real quick on this, sorry. Regarding this particular case, I mean, yes, he's autistic, but he's also human, and like in any human interaction, you can and are allowed to set boundaries.
Yes.
The reason I had the aforementioned mental breakdown was because my roommate did not set boundaries. She was overly clingy, to the point of, it got very weird, and I'm not going to get into it, but basically, long story short, her mother died and she tried to replace that relationship with me. And that was really not good. There were no boundaries there. She was clingy, she wanted to share a bed, all of these things. And that made me realize, boundaries are really important. The irony is that her address was 12 Boundary Avenue. And that kind of just made me think so while yes, it's very important to advocate for and serve these communities, but when if you need to put in boundaries as an advocate, you can do that. I sometimes have to take breaks from my advocacy work because I need to put those boundaries in place for myself. And if somebody is overstepping those bounds, regardless of disability, you can tell them this. And as long as you tell them in a respectful manner, then they should hopefully understand, unless they're one of those people who kind of just does not take criticism very well. But that's, again, not limited to disability, that's just limited to personality. So it's very important to advocate and to help this kid as much as he can. He seems like a great kid, and he really seems like he likes library work. I would encourage him to go into the field and go into debt like me. And then live with your parents until you're 45. I still live at home if it's not obvious. And he really seems like he has a passion for library work or just being in the library, and I think that's awesome. But if you need to set a boundary with him, you are absolutely within your rights to do so, especially if it's interfering with your work as a librarian. In library school, we kind of learned that if you're on reference and someone's taking up too much of your time, you could tell them to, like, you could say, like, I've got other things I have to do, I have to help other patrons. I mean, if I'll have days where nobody's in there and I can edit someone's term paper for them at the desk, which I've done. And then I'll have days where I have a million people coming up at once and the phone is ringing off the thing, and I'm like having a minor existential crisis inside because I don't know how to do all of these things at once. And on those days, I have to set my boundaries and say, hey, look, I'll be with you in a moment. And you can do that with him, as long as you're respectful and, you let him down gently. You're going to be okay. Or you should be. Go ahead.
In terms of this particular case, I guess, it's interesting. I don't know if you've sat down and talked to him and told him what because...
Yeah.
Okay, yeah, so I guess I would just continue that conversation because, I guess we, just treat him like he's not, almost treat him like as though he's not autistic. Just see him as another person who you need to talk to, and maybe he's an interesting guy, and maybe take her advice and encourage him to go into the profession. Just sort of, it's interesting what you can learn about someone when you talk to them. And it's because we make a lot of assumptions about people, especially when we don't talk to them. And we sort of just let everyone walk around their own little silos, and it's like we just, it's interesting. I want to demystify. He tells you everything. Oh, okay. Well, I don't know.
That's good. It means he trusts you, though. That's
really
important. Yeah.
So maybe it sounds like you're doing the right thing already. So maybe you don't need our advice. Maybe you're already doing what you can do. Maybe you just need that confirmation. You're doing okay. You're doing fine. But
go you.
I would just love to demystify theory of mind, because it's the kind of thing that people only talk about as something that autistics lack. And yet no one ever talks about when non-autistics lose theory of mind.
Yeah, a lot of,
when for instance...
A lot of narcissists.
Yeah.
The narcissistic personality.
I'm saying not even pathologically. I'm saying just normal run-of-the-mill stuff. It's everyone's sitting here in this room, you don't know what the person sitting next to is necessarily thinking, yet you're probably making 10 million assumptions about what they are thinking. You may be right, you may be wrong. Lack of theory of mind, it seems to me, is a normal human impulse.
Yeah.
It seems to me it's quite normal that I'm going to make assumptions about what you think based on what I know, and I can be wrong. And it's like, it'd be interesting if discourse would be more accepting of that, not just assume that theory of mind has to be pathological. That's just, I'll get off my soapbox.
No, but it's good though, because I've had a point in my life where I've just decided to assume absolutely nothing about anybody, and it's actually made me a less judgmental person, which is kind of cool. So you're right.
And I think I'm going to interject a little bit from the neurotypical side. One of the things that I think is hardest for many people is recognizing that even the ADA says reasonable accommodation, which is not the same as every possible accommodation in the world, then what? It really is what's reasonable. I have 400 and something clients in my agency. The overwhelming majority of them are at some point on the spectrum. I have some individuals who will come in and they'll see me and hand bump and smile and walk away. And that's the extent of communication. And then I have a couple of others who, if I let them sit down in my office, it will be an exercise to get them out sometime in the next day. But that doesn't mean I don't talk to them or I don't listen to them. It means that we have a short conversation and then I give a couple of hints And eventually I may have to say, okay, it's time for you to go to your next thing because I have to go to my next thing. And not everybody likes that, but that's part of being reasonable, that's part of teaching. I know there was something in the listserv that goes with this program a while ago about a family who went into a library and routinely took out 100 plus DVDs when the library policy was 10. My thought about reading that was allowing 100 DVDs to be taken out is not a reasonable accommodation, and it's reasonable to set some limits and maybe modify the standard, but that doesn't mean anything goes, everything goes.
Because it's the impact on everybody.
Exactly.
And the library's ability to provide equitable services to the community.
Exactly.
Yeah, I think Emmanuel counts here.
And just, I'll give my little brief lecture on theory of mind, very briefly. The first is that there's a lot of movement away from the concept that theory of mind explains autism. So I'll start out with that. But the experiment that was done to look at theory of mind was essentially having a Cracker Jack box, putting a toy car in it, and letting a child with autism look at it and say, what do you think is in the box? And the child apparently knew what Cracker Jack was, said Cracker Jack, they pour it out, it's a car. And so they put the car back in the box and then say, what will your mother think is in the box? And when the child says, a car, that's the lack of theory of mind. It's the idea that what I know, everybody knows. What I believe, everybody believes. And you know what? There's a lot of people who don't get that, and it has nothing to do with whether or not you're on the spectrum.
You know, I've often wondered about the theory of mind test if we could make it a little more real world. I mean, for instance, usually it's Sally and Ann, and you know, Sally's put the marble here. Sally leaves the room, whereas Ann moves the marble, and Sally comes back in, whereas Sally gonna look for the marble. Well, what if instead of a marble, it was a wallet? And what if Sally and Ann came from different racial backgrounds, or they were different? If one was poor, one was rich, or what if they just had an argument outside in the hallway before they went in and did this? In other words, more than the dynamics, the social dynamics that would change, that we all live with every day. And when we're angry, we don't necessarily think. I mean, when does reason when does passion overcome reason? I mean, I'd love to see an experiment that would look at theory of mind and make it less clinical.
I think that'd be awesome. That'd be awesome. Let's
I guess I opened up a can of worms. Okay.
If I might propose an alternative. When I've been in disability advocacy, there was one day we were at a conference, I was sitting next to a blind man who was taking notes in Braille, and as somebody who was on the spectrum, I can't very well tell him to stop taking notes, so we had to do a little bit of creative arranging. It was a big noisy room, so instead of sitting across from him, I went over right next to him where I wasn't in his stream of sound. There was another person who was sitting over here, and I don't think we always know what's possible. Another time I was going to college, and there were 3 friends with disabilities, but we were going to Walmart, the only place in town that sells school supplies. I'm taller, so I could get the stuff off the top shelf for my shorter friend. I had anxiety and sometimes lose speech, and she would let everyone know what I needed. Our friend who used the power chair, everybody moved out of her way, so she cleared the way for both of us when we were having our anxiety attacks. And afterwards, when we went to the food court, we helped our friend who used the power chair eat because he didn't have use of her hands. I honestly don't think we're using all of the solutions we're not doing all the things that could be possible. We're not thinking of. We don't always know what's possible for our folks. And I'll get off my soapbox now.
Thank you. And there's a question.
Actually, it's not a question.
Oh.
It's just an observation and a suggestion for this lady with Anthony. We have a son who who has been never diagnosed as Asperger's or autism, but yet, listening to all of you in your descriptions, you could put him on that spectrum. So he's at a major disadvantage because he gets no services and never will. And for Anthony, what we've done for our son is he gets overexcited. He's like Anthony, he starts talking. So we've had to develop ways of communicating or hints or flags. And one of them is he developed himself. Just tell me to back off. And tell me what? Just say back off. You know, tell me what? And say, okay, we can do that. Another one is on the scale of 1 to 10. What can you do? If it's a 1, you can do nothing, then he has learned to accept that over time. If it's on a 10, whatever, then we'll say to him, well, what can you do to change it? But we have to he's had to develop his own flags. We've had to help him implement them. And that's maybe something you can do with Anthony, is talk to him about that and say, Anthony, you get overexcited or you begin to take too much time. You know, explain why. He's a human being. He's an adult, able to understand. Maybe just use the word back off. When I say back off, because I have to get my work done, that might be a signal to him that he needs to go do something else. Or find a task for him to do, have a suggestion, but involve him with that conversation. Because he's really the one that can advocate for himself. He's the one that can give you the tools to help him use his own tools.
I have to say, you're doing a great job with your son. That's honestly fantastic on how to work with a child as opposed to kind of working over a child. I think that's excellent. And it is good advice. I tell my friends actually something very similar. I'll be like, if I am talking about something and I am talking about it too much, you can tell me to shut up. Like if I am going into like the semantics of something you guys don't know about, like if I'm going into like really detailed descriptions of the physicality of Buster Keaton's comedy and you don't care, you can tell me you don't care. And I will say, okay, why don't we talk about something we all like you know, a show we all watch or something. And because sometimes I'm not gonna always know that I'm going off on one of my tangents until somebody's like, hey, Steph, like, it's been like 30 minutes and you're still talking about Buster Keaton. You should kind of, and I'm like, oh, okay, yeah. So, I mean, again, it's so like putting those limits in place and having that healthy communication is really the key to the success with this, I think, specifically. So, you're doing a great job.
Okay. And my watch has finally caught up with my body and told me that it's lunchtime.
Oh.
So what I would like
cool.
to do is thank the panel for a lot of very valuable information. Perhaps one of the most important things that they demonstrated without saying is we had 4 intelligent professional individuals here who just happen to be autistic and just happen to have connections with librarians. But they're 4 individuals who have a lot of differences as well as some similarities. And that may be one of the most important things we all take away from here. For those who like music, there used to be a guy called Pete Seeger. He's not Bob Seger's father. And there's a song, Little Boxes. Think about it. Look it up on YouTube. Some of us have trouble getting out of them. So thank you, and it's lunch, and we'll reconvene, I think, in an hour. I don't have my schedule up yet. 1 hour.